Hello. For quite some time I've wanted to make a video about punching. Of course that's really important to any kind of combat sport. It's right at the heart of it in most cases. It's a very big subject and it could easily take up half an hour, perhaps an hour, and I don't think that many people are going to want to watch a combat sport based video of that length. If, like me, you've worked for some large corporations, you've probably been faced with this sort of information before, where people say that people rarely take away more than 20% of the information they've been given during training. And if you worked for some large corporations, probably like me, you didn't have a lot of enthusiasm for the subject and you felt yourself wanting to go to sleep after about an hour at the best. Hopefully this won't be anywhere near as boring as that, but I'm going to keep it short anyway. Plan to make these videos, hopefully a fairly long series of videos in 5 to 10 minute slots, and we'll see how many it takes. Right, to begin with, let's have a look at the weapon itself. Now, in nature, I don't think there's many things, if anything, that uses a fist as a weapon. If we observe apes, monkeys, I think on the occasions that they will use their hands, they're more likely to thump with a hammer fist or grab, tear. There wouldn't be much of a reason to use your knuckles when you've got nasty sharp claws, probably riddled with disease at the end of your hands, and they're much more likely to use those. I think this is the sort of thing that Joe Rogan discusses a lot. If if a chimpanzee attacks somebody, it's grasping and it's biting. Now, to think about punching, perhaps the only example from nature I can really think of is it a mantis shrimp that can break glass? Of course, that's biologically nothing like a human, so we ought to not try to emulate that. Of course, we could have people look at Bruce Lee's mythical 1-inch punch and perhaps consider that similarly. Anyway, the point is that in nature, I don't think there's any precedent for using your fist, and the human body isn't really that well adapted to it. But of course, as civilizations developed and people record and share knowledge, obviously people began to learn that this can be an effective way to punch if you're prepared for it. You may know, if you have trained or perhaps even got into a fight without protection on your hands, that it's really easy to damage them if you start punching in the chaos and fury of a fight and you start hitting the wrong parts of the body, catching them with the wrong parts of your body. There's a lot of potential for damage to you. I remember a story about Alistair Overeem, a formidable, huge human being. This was even when he was on the chemical assistance. He got into a fight in a nightclub with his brother, and I can't remember if it was Overeem or his brother who had to go to hospital with a broken hand. I'm sure they in the process did a lot of damage to one of the staff in the club. I don't know the details of that. I won't assume that they were in the wrong. That's not really the point here. But somebody as well trained and as strong and durable as Overeem or his brother, still quite easily able to break his hand, probably on somebody's jaw. This means that if you want to use your fist as a weapon, you've got to do it very carefully. And there is a lot of use for conditioning and making it tougher, but there's only so far it can go. And whatever you do, these bones right here aren't very strong, and if these come into contact at high speed with somebody's jaw, you're going to hurt the jaw, but I think your fingers are probably going to suffer more. If you spin the head in the right way, you might knock them out, so you might still win, but it's going to do you damage. This leads us on to hand position and how you should punch, what parts of your hand you want to come into contact with the target using. I began learning about combat sports. Actually, I first learned a bit about combat sports when I was about 5 years old, studying judo. Didn't do that for very long, but the first time I began to take it seriously was Shotokan karate. And we were taught right from the start that you must only contact with these two knuckles. There should always be your intention, you aim with these, and this is your point of impact. I remember our instructor called Dave, long time ago, told us that these two are floating knuckles. I've not heard this said elsewhere. I can't find much online about it. I used to believe it. I don't know if it's true or not. I mean, no doubt the structure here is stronger than here, but I don't know if we call them floating knuckles. I don't know if that's biologically correct. I had it ingrained in me though that you must always strike with these two knuckles exclusively and nothing else. You might be the same. I think a lot of martial artists are, and you might be like me. When I first encountered the idea that you should actually hit with these knuckles, these three here, I was incredulous. Sometimes you come across some information and you're doubtful. This wasn't the case of that. I just thought, this is rubbish, it's wrong. How could I have been told the wrong thing for so many years? And I was absolutely sure it was incorrect. But since then, I've learned a lot. And now I do believe there might be times when you want to punch with these knuckles rather than these two. Most importantly though, it's best to be equipped to punch with either of them if at all possible. And I certainly no longer believe that it's stupid or impossible to try to contact with these. Now, if you have a similar sort of background in Shotokan or in various similar martial arts, you might think, like I did, what a silly idea, don't punch with those three knuckles. I'm not asking you to take my word for it, but I know that there's a book by Jack Dempsey that addresses this in particular, and he had no doubt whatsoever. You aim and you punch with these three knuckles. I'm not going to argue with Jack Dempsey. He's a boxer I admire a great deal. He has a book. I don't get the title quite right. It's something like Championship Fighting, Explosive Striking, Aggressive Defense. That's not quite correct, but if you search for Jack Dempsey Championship PDF, you're going to find it. It was published long enough ago that it's free, so you can download it online. Thing is, if you do that, you might not have that much use for me. Alternatively, you might not want to spend time reading the book. So I hope you'll stick around to watch this anyway. I'm going to try to not just poorly paraphrase everything Jack Dempsey said in his book. In fact, I won't spend all that much time on positioning. One thing I am going to say, and I can't refer to this, it would be wrong for me to refer to this without acknowledging his book. He talks about the power line, which is referred to from the shoulder to the point of contact. This, I think, is the physical proof that it's often going to be better, more powerful to punch with these three knuckles rather than these two knuckles. And it's a way that we can feel that for ourselves. If you stand against the wall or a bag and you put pressure on with your top two knuckles, what you're doing is you're requiring the wrist to bend. It's quite natural for me to do that, a straight line from the shoulder all the way through the elbow and the wrist. As soon as I do that, I'm bending the wrist a little bit, and that puts it in danger. Now, I don't think you can train in martial arts for that long without having an injury at some point on your wrist, and there's a fair chance it was because you were, rather than holding a natural line like this, you were doing that to make sure you hit with these, and you put your wrist in a poorer position because of it. And you can do it, like I say, against any wall. You can do that, and I think you can feel the force going all the way through up to your shoulder. And as soon as you do that, there's less of a straight line, and geometrically you're causing something of a problem. Doesn't mean that you never want to punch like that. Doesn't mean you can't be incredibly effective always punching like that. But you should be aware of the fact that it's not the optimum position for the human wrist. I used to find it very painful even to hit the bag with these three knuckles, and I tried to improve simply by doing it. A lot of contact like that. Now, this isn't the hardest bag, nothing like a sandbag, but it's not that soft either. I've had people hit it who don't train very much, and they find it quite uncomfortable. And that's probably what you want. If you start putting a lot of pressure into sandbags all the time as a part of conditioning, you might do a little bit of damage, and it's probably better to begin with something a little bit softer and work your way up. And with a bag like this stuffed with fabric, you can see at the top here it's quite soft. over time the fabric will compress, and then you put more in, a lot of force, and it becomes harder. And of course it absorbs water, becomes heavier, and as it impacts more, it is a hard thing to hit. It's not just like hitting a cushion by any means whatsoever. And it is good enough to condition your hands on. I do like to use wood sometimes, and I can hit with those knuckles. This is quite soft, but over time it will toughen up the bone and the skin. The important thing is not to overdo it, because if you start doing damage, especially to the bone, then it'll take a long time to recover and you're really working against your goal. Right, so what we have so far is consideration of the position of your hand, and you probably want to contact with these 3 knuckles most of the time. I remember somebody I know of online was asked this question. It's somebody his name's Jordan. He's American. He's a breaker, breaks concrete. He's very good at it. Break many pieces of concrete with his elbow. I think he's done a little bit with his head, and quite a bit with his fists. And he's very effective at it. When he was asked the question about contacting with these 2 knuckles or these 3 knuckles, he said, whatever, just hit them. And I tend to agree with that now. And if you're going to get into a fight without wraps and without gloves on, you really want to be in a good position to hit with these 3 knuckles instead of necessarily these 2. And you may find that it's going to be advantageous and more protective of your wrist if you do that. Next thing we're going to have a look at is a target that you're likely to hit. Now then, mostly if you're going to be punching to the body, you've got a fairly soft target. So that's probably why I think a lot of the time boxers, when they're hitting the body, they'll do uppercuts that I think end up in a slightly poor position, because it's simply quite difficult to do a large swing, keep your hand perfectly aligned when you're going through such an extreme angle. I sometimes try this. Sometimes when I'm sitting watching TV, it's not a very physical exercise, but I will sometimes try to do this and make sure I hit a target without bending my wrist, which is what I feel tempted to do. If I'm coming towards this, punching down, then I'm very likely to do that, and I work hard on making sure I do that instead. And it feels strange, because you feel that you want to do that, bend towards it, but of course that's a great vulnerability. You're going to do a great deal of damage to your wrist if you punch things like that. And if you're doing an overhand and you're coming down, I think you're quite susceptible to taking a bad angle here, and it might not be a bad idea. Sometimes when you're sitting there at your desk or in a chair watching something, try to get used to making sure you're punching, and when you're going down, you don't point down, you still keep pointing up, and by the time you hit it, you'll be perfectly aligned for it. Now, what's important about looking at the targets is with consideration to hand vulnerability. If you hit with these 3 knuckles, or these 2 knuckles, regardless of any disadvantage that might give you to your wrist, then you can hit something very hard and you're going to be quite safe. But nothing's perfect in a fight. And as soon as you start contacting here, on this bone, and I'm not very good at biology, perhaps I should have looked up what these bones are called. It doesn't really matter for the principle. If you contact here, then you're very likely to suffer damage, because here you've got long compressive force along the whole of the bone. Here it's just a force that could, without too much, snap that bone, and even if it doesn't, it could fracture it, it could do a great deal of damage to it, and it's going to hurt a lot. This brings us on to bone strength, and as always with exercise, it's a really good idea to make sure you have a very good intake of calcium and all nutrients necessary, and also that you regularly put your bones under sufficient stress, not enough to break them, but enough to encourage growth and encourage them to remain strong. And I think that's it for this one. Next, we'll look at punching strength and position. Now, this is to do with hinges and the amount of hinges and the amount of movements in your body that can contribute towards the contact at the point when you make a punch. But that's for next time. So for now, I'll just say thanks for watching, and I'll try to have the next part of this series up within 2 weeks. But in the meantime, I'll probably make another video that will be about lifting. Thanks a lot. My name's Mark. See you next time. Cheers.